Welcome back. Just last week, U.S. lawmakers approved a last-minute deal to avert the fiscal cliff. They agreed on taxes, but not on spending cuts. And they also postponed a decision on the debt ceiling. That means a new deadline, a new financial cliff, and another battle. The debt ceiling is the legal limit that the U.S. government is allowed to borrow to pay for programs approved by Congress, basically government spending. That borrowing limit or debt ceiling also has to be approved by Congress. Right now, the limit is at $16.4 trillion with a T. Thanks to heavy spending and government spending, that adds about $1 trillion every year to its debt. So why is this a big issue? Well, America borrows money to pay off old debts and interest to run the government. That means every federal program, all federal employees, some states and some cities also rely on that money as well for their programs. And if Congress doesn't raise the ceiling and come to an agreement, the government essentially shuts down. That means no mail, no paychecks, no Social Security. You see where I'm going with this. For more about this, we talk it out with our guest, Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro-Pacific Capital, a global investment strategies company. And joining me live here in the studio is Gabe Roth, Vice President of SKDKnickerbocker, a strategic communications firm. Peter, let me start with you. We just finished this big debate about the spending and the cuts and the taxes. The tax part is out of the way, so we won't have to debate that, but this also coincides the ceiling along with the spending cuts. Those two, don't both parties, the Democrats and Republicans, basically have to agree on both of those before we can move further?
Yeah, well, they may have debated spending cuts, but they didn't actually cut any spending. And now the debate over raising the debt ceiling, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling so that we can pay our bills. It's the opposite. We're going to raise the debt ceiling because we can't afford to pay our bills. So instead of actually paying our bills, we're going to borrow more money instead. Basically, what you described before you introduced me, we are running the world's greatest Ponzi scheme. We can't pay anybody back. All we can do is borrow money from the same people who loaned it to us in the first place and hope they don't notice that it's a Ponzi scheme.
All right, Peter, let me get Gabe in here. I mean, look, what Peter's saying, I'll help you answer part of it. He's not wrong. I mean, we owe the world, the United States, a heck of a lot of money, 16-some trillion dollars. So essentially, they're going to Congress. Congress has to agree and approve of a higher debt ceiling so we can borrow more money. When does this debate begin?
The debate begins in earnest when Congress comes back to town the next couple of days. But as you've seen with a lot of the action in Congress, they are most likely not going to make a decision until the 11th hour. As you remember with the fiscal cliff that we reached on December 31st, Congress actually didn't make their decision until New Year's Day. And so similarly with the debt ceiling, there may be some back and forth in the next couple of weeks, but I wouldn't expect anything to happen for another 4 to 6 weeks.
Let's start with strategy. What do the Democrats offer first, do you think?
Well, I think that, really you have two separate issues, right? You have the debt ceiling, and you have, which is the debt, and then you have the budget deficit. So first, I think the debt ceiling is something that we can all agree on we need to pass quickly. I mean, it's ridiculous that this has gone on. The debt ceiling basically says that the U.S. government can borrow to pay for its existing obligations, right? So that's all the Social Security, the money for the troops that we've already put out. Now, in terms of the deficit, the budget deficit, the Democrats are going to want to do two things. They're going to want to raise revenue, and they're going to want to cut spending, and they're going to want to do it in a balanced way.
Now, Peter, we've already talked about revenue. You mentioned it earlier. The tax issue has been semi-resolved. But in terms of where the GOP stance is, when they come back to session and they begin day one, where do the conservatives begin this debate?
Well, it's all going to be political theater, just like it was with the fiscal cliff. I knew all along that Congress wasn't going to cut any spending, and nor did they raise taxes adequately to even make a dent in the deficit. They exempted 99% of the people from the higher income taxes, and so they're going to do the same thing. Plenty of people, plenty of Republicans in particular, are going to try to act like they really care about reducing the deficit, but at the end of the day, they're going to sign on to an irresponsible increase in the debt ceiling. The responsible thing would be to not increase the debt ceiling and dramatically reduce government spending so that we don't have to borrow money, so that we can actually service the debt. But the reality is we can't, because eventually interest rates are going to go up. And when they do, it'll be impossible to even pay the interest on the debt, let alone actually retire the principal.
Peter, you've been on the show a number of times. It's great to have you on the show. You know our audience is very international. They look at the situation and say, in 2011, Congress tried to put the deal together. In 2012, they tried again. What makes this year any different in the hopes of having Congress come to a value-added type of an agreement?
Well, it's not any different. Congress is not going to act responsibly until it is forced to do so by a real crisis. I'm talking about a crisis that's similar to what's going on in countries like Greece. We're going to have a currency crisis, a sovereign debt crisis, where the world that is financing our profligacy stops doing it. Once they realize that printing money is the same as defaulting. Everybody talks about our printing press, and we can keep printing money to pretend that we can pay our bills. But ultimately, from the perspective of a creditor, getting paid back with worthless money is the same thing as not getting paid back at all.
Peter,
and if we keep printing money at the rate we're printing it, it eventually will be worthless.
Peter, for just a moment. Is this year any different? I mean, should we expect a deal?
Well, I think that the president this time around is in a greater position of strength, having won the election. The Senate that was just sworn in last week has a higher number of Democrats, as does the House. So I think the president is going to be negotiating from a higher point of strength, and he's the only one who's negotiating for on the debt ceiling, who's not up for re-election anytime soon. So I think that that he's going to stick to the same framework in terms of balanced revenue increases and balanced spending cuts. But I would expect him to come out stronger.
Cuts. What are you talking about?
Of course, there's spending cuts. I mean, you look at the course of the last 4 years. The war in Iraq ended. The war in Afghanistan has been drawn down. Changes in
gentlemen, I've got to stop both of you there. We're out of time. I apologize.
Next year, though,
is
the government going to spend more money than the previous year
Absolutely.
or less money?
Be glad to come back and discuss this more with you. And
Peter
as well.
Peter, we're going to have you back again. Thank you very much, Gabe. Thank you very much. For now, I got to send it over to New York to Michelle McCorry.